last minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today I'm going to answer some questions. Well, I'm not going to answer some questions. I'm going to ask questions, but we get this a lot, these questions about metabolism. Metabolism, what happens to my metabolism as I get older? What happens if I'm trying to lose weight and I stop eating so much? Do I lower my metabolism? What happens to my metabolism if I gain more muscle, if I do more cardio, metabolism, blah, 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 blah. We're going to learn about metabolism today, but you're going to learn it from me. What I've done is I've reached out to a friend and colleague of mine who I've known for many, many moons. And if you've listened to the podcast, you probably have heard him on here a while back, and it is long overdue to welcome back my friend, Fabio Comana. What's up, Fabio?
Hey, Rick. Good morning. Good to see you. Happy birthday.
It's always great.
Hey,
Hey, for the people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about you.
well, this is me. No. So I obviously been involved with NASM for several years, but my prime responsibility is I am faculty at San Diego State University. So I teach there. I teach in our School of Exercise and Nutritional Sciences. Teach courses in physiology, kinesiology, movement type stuff, right? And then I've been, obviously, like you, been in the fitness industry for quite a while. And, sort of being a presenter, public speaker, author, kind of involved in speaking at a lot of conferences, even organizing conferences. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now. And my last kind of endeavor is I've been kind of contracted to write a series of 7 handbooks, which I'm doing for personal trainers. So I'm just kind of getting the first 2 about to be published. The first one is Principles of Nutritional Science. The second one is Nutritional Coaching. And then I'm kind of, starting my third one, which is Sports Nutrition. And then I'll kind of run through the gambit of all 7. And they're just going to be, 6x9 handbooks that trainers can kind of keep with them as a resource guide.
Smart. Oh, I like that.
Fun.
Yeah, that's a nice little thing to have on hand. You know what I read a long time ago? This is actually kind of funny. So it was a podcast called Finding Richard Simmons. And Richard Simmons not too long ago passed away, but there was a podcast about him. And I didn't know this. He, early on in his career, he had franchises and made bukus off of it. By the way, Richard Simmons was rich. And long before Dancing to the Oldies, he was rich. And one of the ways that he made money were these little exercise things that fit inside your wallet, because there were no phones where you could pull up anything. Exercises that you could fit in your wallet, do anywhere. And he made $1 bazillion off of it. And I think what you're doing is great, because for us, for fitness professionals, to have something on hand as a resource from a trusted person, then I think that's great. And I wish you all the Richard Simmons money in the world.
No. It's really a bucket list item. To me, it's about making a difference. And it's something I've always wanted to do. I have all my electronic textbooks from the university. So, I figured, why not? I love writing, and I've got a time in my career right now where I'm kind of scaling back on certain things, and it's giving me the opportunity to check off that item off my bucket list. So it's going to be the next probably 3 years of my life, but I'm really looking forward to kind of finishing all 7 of them.
Excellent. I love it, man. I love it. Well, let me start asking you questions, because you did a lot about nutrition. Now, I know you know a lot about exercise science. So let's talk about metabolism. So you, as an exercise physiologist, let's learn a little bit more about what metabolism is, and then what are some of the things that affect it? Because most people are asking this question about metabolism because they want to lose weight. They want to lose body fat. So give us a little outline around metabolism, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, it can be defined in many different ways, but essentially, when we look at this concept of metabolism, we're really talking about, the net sum of all the calories I burn in a day. And it's really, sort of comprised of several moving parts. The first one that we really look at is your resting metabolic rate. That's usually what most people are thinking about when they ask questions around metabolism, right? And so we talk about your resting metabolic rate, right? In the old days, we used to use a basal metabolic rate, so a BMR and an RMR. They're not essentially the same. They're actually measured differently at different times of your day, but we kind of use them synonymously now. So for the simplicity of our conversation today, I'm going to talk about resting metabolic rate. So resting metabolic rate really is the energy your body just expends just being alive. There's no, we're not talking, we're not browsing our phones, we're not eating, we're not chewing, we're not listening to music. You are just literally in a reclining chair facing the wall and spending 24 hours that way. Of course, we'd never test you that way. So what we typically do is if we're truly testing that, we test for a portion of the day. It might just be, 15 minutes, and then we extrapolate that to 24 hours. Now, the reality is that accounts for most of your calories. That can be anywhere between 60 to 75% of all the calories you burn in a day. So that's the big piece. And that's what most people want to try and shift, because we realize that's where you're going to have the biggest impact, right? Now, the other parts of your metabolism are pretty simple. We kind of group them under what we call the thermic effect of food. And that's about 10% of all your calories. Now, the thermic effect of food is really the calories you expend chewing food, swallowing food, digesting food, absorbing food, storing food. It's like that cost, right? And then the last one is what we call TEPA, thermic effect of physical activity. And here's where we bundle together your exercise, any sort of movement, physical activity, and even what we call your NEAT, N-E-A-T, which is a term called non-exercise activity thermogenesis that is becoming more and more popular. And it's really this idea of the energy I expend from standing rather than sitting, fidgeting, just moving about, right? Now, you notice the word thermogenesis, has been used. It's because when we think about metabolism, we think about calories. But how do we measure that? Well, we measure it directly, which we don't really do much more anymore because it's very expensive, is we measure the heat that you're liberating. Much like your car liberates heat when you run the engine, the car's not 100% efficient. It actually burns. Part of that fuel gets liberated as heat. And we have a law of thermodynamics that says energy is never created, energy is never destroyed. It just passes through one form to another, and ultimately energy will degrade to heat. And that's why we thermoregulate. That's why we remove heat, because when we're sitting here, we're burning calories, but it actually converts to heat, and we need to liberate that from the body, right? And we do generate heat because we're not 100% efficient. So when you hear the word thermogenesis, I'm like, wait, that means generating heat. How's that got to do with metabolism? It's the simple idea that calories get burnt and eventually they degrade to heat, and that heat needs to be liberated. So if we're measuring your metabolic rate, one way we measure it is we measure how much heat you liberate. Now, as I said, great way to measure it, just an expensive way. So nowadays, we prefer just oxygen utilization, because we know that when you burn oxygen, you burn calories. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of an understanding.
Yeah. So is that why they also will then use heart rate as an estimation for calories, because heart rate is associated with respiratory rate?
Not respiratory rate, but oxygen utilization.
Okay, right. Okay.
So it's a very crude, I'm going to say crude because it's not a very accurate way, but it is a very simplistic, accessible, easy to measure methodology, because we have discovered in research that there is I'm going to use the word liberally, somewhat linear relationship between heart rate and oxygen utilization. In other words, as heart rate goes up, think of you exercising harder and harder, oxygen utilization goes up, which means we're burning more oxygen, we're burning more calories. That makes sense. But that relationship, unfortunately, Rick, does not exist near maximal levels. So there's a deviation, because as we get to near maximal, we call it a heart rate threshold. It's not your max heart rate. There's a deviation in that relationship, which means at some point, and we're all different, your heart rate does not accurately represent your VO2, and it also doesn't apply to rest. Let's use this as an example. Think about what happens to your resting heart rate as you become more conditioned. It goes down, right?
Yeah, it drops quicker.
Yeah. Well, it also, your resting heart rate will drop because you're becoming more efficient in terms of your cardiovascular efficiency. Think about it. Cardiac output is a function of heart rate times stroke volume. Stroke volume is how much blood does the heart eject every time it contracts, right? Now, at rest, whether you're fit or unfit, your cardiac output doesn't change that much. But because an adaptation to training, especially aerobic type training, we see an expansion of your blood volume, we see an expansion of your heart chamber size. Therefore, we see an expansion of your stroke volume, which means if your cardiac output is fixed, stroke volume has gone up, correspondingly, your resting heart rate is going to go down. Now, think about that. If we're using heart rate to correlate to VO2, what we're essentially saying is when you become more fit and your heart rate goes down, so is your resting VO2, which means you're burning less calories when you're fit than when you're not fit. And that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that relationship that you mentioned, heart rate, it holds some truth somewhere between low intensity exercise to near maximal. But at the two extremes, there's no accuracy in that relationship.
Oh, okay. Got you. Now, I've heard a lot of times where sometimes people will say, I'm not eating very much. I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to cut calories. And they cut seemingly significant amounts of calories. It doesn't seem to be helping a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And people will also say, well, I'm concerned that if you cut calories too much, you're going to screw up your metabolism. Is there truth to that? What does it mean when somebody says, you're going to mess up your metabolism because you're not eating enough? Or is that also the same thing if you're eating too much?
Yeah. So it's interesting how the body has this kind of built-in set of kind of internal controls. And let's focus on the one you're talking about. There is this myth that if I want to lose weight, it's really a matter of reducing calories, right? So, hey, I've got an idea. Let's restrict our calories. And so we see some people, whether they're doing extreme fasting protocols or they're just restricting calories through their day. I mean, people have restricted calories all the way down to 400 calories a day. Usually those are medically supervised for very obvious reasons. We have to make sure you're getting the right nutrients. We're not disrupting your physiology, things of that nature. But people might do something not quite as extreme, but still significant on their own volition, right? Where they might say, hey, maybe my body is consuming 2,500 calories, but I want to lose weight. So I'm going to drop it down to 1,000 calories, right? Okay. And then they wonder, why am I not, initially there's some impressive weight loss and there's reasons for that. And we can get into that if you'd like. But then they notice after a while, wow, I'm really not losing weight like I thought I would. Here I've dropped 1,500 calories, out of my diet, and I'm finding that I'm not really losing weight. Well, there's a simple explanation for that, right? We go back to what we talked about. The bulk of your calories, which is about 60 to 75%, are needed just to maintain your physiology, right?
Right.
And our body has a built-in set of mechanisms that if you decide to starve it of essential calories, which it needs to fuel that physiology, it's going to become very frugal in terms of how it expends calorie. Remember earlier I mentioned we're kind of very wasteful. We're not very efficient in terms of how we burn calories. Well, guess what? The body will figure out a way to become more efficient, right? And so what happens is, and it's triggered through, hormonal systems predominantly, where if the body senses it's being starved, in other words, your energy reserves are gradually being diminished, right? One of the mechanisms is the body's going to realize, hey, we've got to kind of, this idea of feast or famine, we've got to start to becoming very frugal in terms of how we expend our calories. So we probably release a hormone like cortisol. And one of the effects of the many effects that cortisol has is that it can affect the production of thyroid stimulating hormone in the brain. And that in turn will impact the production of your two primary thyroid hormones, which control your metabolism. So T3 and T4. And the suppression of that can actually suppress your overall metabolism, that big piece of the pie that I was alluding to, by up to about 20%. Now think about it. If you were needing 1,500 calories a day for your normal physiology, your RMR, and I suppress that by 20%, and I'm just using 20% as my example. We don't know what that number is. It could be as high as 20%, right?
Okay.
Think about it. 20% of 1,500 is about 300 calories.
Right.
Now you take 300 calories and you extrapolate that over 365 days. Excuse my language, but it's a crap load of calories, right?
Right.
Now, we use this old number. I know it's not accurate, but everyone's used this idea of, hey, how many calories equivalent to a pound? We've always said, well, it's around 3,500, right?
Right.
We know it's not an absolute number, but it's an easy ballpark to work with. Well, if we are looking at that number and you're saying, hey, I'm suppressing your metabolism by up to 300 calories a day, Rick, that could be 31 pounds in a year. If you take 300 calories times 365 days and divide it by that 3,500.
Mm.
So yeah, I use a simple rule when I'm working with people. There's this idea of respect hunger, control appetite. And I kind of distinguish the two. I talk about how hunger is controlled and how appetite is regulated. And there's a very quick way I can share with you. It's like I just say hunger is controlled below the neckline. It's biological. It's the need for your body to replenish energy reserves. So what does it mean? It means you're running out of energy reserves. You're thermoregulating because you're cold and you need energy to fuel it. Your hormonal levels are changing. So it's all biology, right? Hormones, everything controlled below the neckline, right? I know it's not an exact analogy because a lot of hormones come out of the brain, But then I say appetite is controlled above the neckline. It's thoughts, emotions. I see something, I smell something, I have a craving. And the big difference is hunger has a gradual onset. You're not just sitting there and all of a sudden I go, hey, Rick, I'm hungry. How about you? If you would say to me, yeah, I could eat something, that's not because you're hungry. I've created a trigger. I've triggered a craving within you. Say, yeah, I could do something. I could have fun, eat. So hunger has a gradual onset. And then after you eat, it gradually diminishes. And it usually stays away for a few hours before it reappears. It's an undulating process through the day.
Okay.
Appetite is not time dependent. Like you could be sitting there at Thanksgiving going, man, I'm stuffed. I couldn't eat another thing. And then here comes the dessert tray and you go, oh, I'll have some dessert.
Yeah.
Wait, just a second ago, you said you couldn't eat another thing. So appetite is usually it's time independent, but it's also very specific in terms of what would satisfy that craving. It's usually something salty, sweet, or fatty. Whereas hunger can be satisfied by any food that has calories, right? So I always talk about using a hunger scale. I don't know if you've ever shared that with individuals, but there is a hunger scale where we say 4, 5, and 6 is a great range to live through, because 4 is when you start thinking about eating, and you should eat until you are pleasantly satisfied. That's a 6. If you drop to 3, 2s, and 1s, you're going to now binge eat, just like an animal does. It's feast or famine, right? It's our biology. And generally, from the moment you start eating, Rick, it's going to take about 20 minutes before anything in your brain says stop eating. And you know how much damage we can do in 20 minutes?
Yes, I do.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that would be the idea is, this idea, never starve yourself. Like, you think I want to lose weight. Yes, reduce your calories, but don't restrict calories, right? And the idea was, if you feel hungry, you listen to your body. We call it intuitive eating. If you listen to your body, we're trying to tap into responding to what your body's biology is telling you. And if you do feel hungry, separating that from appetite, then eat something small, hopefully something healthy, until you do what? You feel satisfied temporarily, right? And then go about your day until that reappears and continue that process. That way, you can still be very consciously aware of, eating. We say mindful eating, but then we're also intuitively paying attention to our biology. And that's the smartest way to go about, trying to manage these calories rather than doing these drastic weight loss and crazy diets. They inevitably fail.
Yeah, I like where you're making a difference between hunger and appetite. And there's something where your body is like, okay, I'm hungry, it's time to eat. And your brain, because I can do this. I can go by, let's say, a Dunkin' Donuts, and I can look in some of those things, or at a Starbucks, inside of that glass, and I'll be like, gross. I have zero desire. How can people do this? And then some days I'm like, moth to flame. I'm like, I want. And I realize that there's something different in me from day to day, from time to time, when I go in there, where that doesn't appeal at all, versus I have this draw to it. And so that's why I say something, and this might kind of speak to some of the things you were talking about. I generally, with some of my clients who are focusing on losing weight, I'll focus on fiber, I'll focus on protein intake, but I'll also say things like, hey, if you're hungry enough to eat a carrot, you're probably hungry enough to eat. And then I'll also say, if you're hungry enough to eat a carrot, start with the carrot. So don't say I'm hungry enough to eat a carrot, now I'll have the donut. So and I think that's the difference between maybe hunger and appetite.
Yeah. Good luck with the carrot versus the donut, right?
Yeah, seriously, exactly.
Yeah. It comes down to behavioral. Behavioral actions are simply, there's a cue, like you mentioned, you see the donut, and then there's a craving, right? Every stimulus that is going to drive a behavior has to activate some sort of desire or craving, right? Yeah. Regardless of what the craving is. And the craving is just changing the status quo. Like you might be feeling, kind of down, kind of lethargic, and just kind of feeling like, you're not really motivated to do anything. And then all of a sudden you see a commercial on TV where someone's eating an ice cream and they're having this euphoric experience. And consciously or subconsciously, your brain says, I want to be happy like that person.
Yeah.
So craving is just a desire to change the status quo. And then that leads to the behavioral action. If you have access to that ice cream, you might unfortunately go eat that ice cream. And then there's a consequence, which sometimes it's remorse or regret, or it could be, I'm hungry, I feel satisfied, I feel satiated, I feel good. Depends on what the behavior is.
Yeah. Well, listen, also when it comes to let's say we go back to the cutting calories, does cutting calories generally lead us to say, okay, well, I'm cutting calories because my attempt here, still keeping in line with people trying to lose body fat, I'm going to cut calories, but now I've cut calories. Do people, are we trying to keep people up and say, okay, now I've cut calories, but am I getting lethargic, or am I still able to maintain my activities? And then let's look at it the opposite way too, where I'm trying to do the same thing, but I'm doing it through movement. Does moving more and exercising more tend to trigger us eating more, which at the end of the day, it seems like everything stays the same. I'm have fewer calories, but I'm also moving less, or I'm moving more, but now I'm eating more. And at the end of the day, it's really hard to lose weight. What are we looking at here with this?
That's the $1 million question, right? But the idea here is, let's just start from a simple standpoint. I got two options here. I could reduce calories, or I could increase caloric expenditure. Either way, or a combination of the two, hypothetically should lead me to weight loss, right? Well, if we were to just use a quick math example here. If your goal was to reduce 500 calories a day, right? Well, let's think about it. What were your options? One option is I got to expend 500 more calories in my day, all right? Versus I've got to reduce 500 calories out of my diet. Which one of those two is the low-hanging fruit? Well, it's easier just to cut 500 calories out of your diet, because the commitment taken, call it time, effort, motivation, whatever it is, access, to expend 500 more calories is probably less likely for a lot of people, because they're going to tell you, I don't have the time. Yeah. Right. And that's why we've seen all the science has shifted, saying, stop looking at exercise as the modality for weight loss. It's a part of a bigger approach, which is really find ways to expend more calories through your day. And the idea is never ask someone to find more time. Like, I personally find it degrading if someone says, if it's important enough to you, you'll find more time. Because the way I interpret that is, what you're actually telling me is that everything else I do, you're dismissing it as being unimportant. And you don't know me. So how do you know that those are unimportant? If I choose to spend an hour on my couch binge watching a TV show, don't dismiss that. I choose to do that, so it's important to me. So the idea has always been not stop asking people to find more time. Let's just change the way they do the things they do, which is why we had the evolution of the standing workstation, right? I mean, that became a pivotal point out of research at the Mayo Clinic from Levine that really demonstrated the efficacy. If you can find more time in your day to stand, we're not asking you to find more opportunities to stand, not more time, just more opportunities. In other words, change the way you do the things you do. It can have huge implications on weight loss. And that's, I think, where a good place to start is lower the barriers to entry. When we tell people weight loss is all about exercise, most people are just looking and go, I'm so far down this rabbit hole, it's never going to happen, right? And so we should look at a gentler approach. Let's make exercise enjoyable so they'll adhere to the exercise. Let's take the pressure off of squeezing every damn calorie out of a workout, and let's spread that calorie expenditure through the day. And we've got 16 more hours through the day. So that's the one side, right? The other side is, to get what you were saying, is, if we eat, and we can talk about, there's a lot of things, the macros, the timing become very important. We've seen a lot of research on time restricted feeding, right? And in the fitness industry, and I don't quite understand why, there is this, almost popular trend of the 16-8, right? We're going to wait until 12 o'clock to eat, and then we're not going to eat between 12 and 8 o'clock in the evening, right? And then we're going to fast for the next 16 hours. So we have these two phases through a day, a starvation phase and a feeding phase. And research tells us that the body actually biologically is better suited to eating early. For example, it aligns with your circadian rhythms. Like, we're more sensitive to insulin in the morning than we are in the afternoon. So, Rick, if I gave you a handful of carbs and you ate that handful of carbs in the morning versus the afternoon, you're going to need more insulin in circulation in the afternoon to process that carbs than you would in the morning. Now, you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, insulin is also a hormone, being an anabolic hormone, that suppresses fat metabolism. So why would you want more insulin in circulation, right? when I look at it, I'm like, you should be doing everything in your biology to try and do what? Control the levels of cortisol and insulin, because those two hormones can have devastating effects on other hormones, but also on your metabolism and your appetite and your activity and all that kinds of stuff. So I've always, been one thinking, fasting periods, I don't have a problem with, right? Because we see over time, there's generally about a equivalent of about a 25% effect. What I mean by that is when you do some sort of intermittent fasting, whether you're fasting for a full day, you're fasting for periods of the day, and you are actually eating less, it's the equivalent of just cutting your calories on a daily basis by about 25%. That's what we see the equivalent, right?
Okay.
So it makes it more convenient. Like I look at the classic 5-2, right? Mosley's 5-2. It says eat normally for 5 days and then just choose 2 non-consecutive days to do a partial fast. What he means by partial fast is eat 20 to 25% of what you normally eat, right? I like that because it gives you flexibility. Whereas if you're saying cut 25% of your calories every day, that takes a lot of planning. It's tough to do. So I do like some of the benefits that fasting offers. But if you want to do some time restriction, right, I would suggest, eat earlier and fast later, because your body is better suited to that kind of, cycle than it is in terms of being what I call late fed versus being early fed, right?
Okay.
So yeah, you're right. If you are moving more, you're probably going to need more calories. But that doesn't mean using food as a reward. Remember, food should just provide nutrition. It shouldn't be used to, gratify or compensate for emotional states or thoughts, right? So a lot of people have this idea, I'm going to exercise, now I've earned a reward, I'm going to go eat. Well, that's not a smart idea either. That's just going to negate the calories. So you are right. If you're going to move more, you're probably going to expend more calories, which means you're probably going to need a few more calories, but it doesn't mean overindulge, right? And I think the best thing to do is if you have access. So if you were my client, Rick, and you wanted to lose weight, 3 things I would look at. Number 1 is I'd want to get some quantification of your total caloric intake, all right, which we have somewhat accurate ways of doing that. So let's assume you consume 2,500 calories in a day. Okay. Now I want to try and measure with some accuracy, how many calories do you expend in your workout? And let's say that's 500 calories, right? So what I'm going to do is subtract your caloric intake from your caloric expenditure. So my numerator becomes 2,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now what I divide that by is your lean body mass. So again, I need an accurate assessment of your lean body mass. And let's say that was 50 kilograms. We're not talking about body weight. We're talking about lean body weight, right? So 50 kilograms, and it's a metric formula. So I'd have 2,000 divided by 50 gives me a score of 40. We call this your energy availability score, right? And what we're concerned about is low energy availability. So when people start dropping that number, like into the 30s, even below 40s. So below 40, I think it's 40 for men and 45 for women. Don't quote me on that one, but we can always look that up.
Okay.
What you're doing now is you're starting to do what? Realize that you don't have enough calories to support your physiology, because the calories you're eating, subtracting out of there your exercise calories, and then looking at your lean body mass that has to be preserved, you're running a deficit a little bit. And what you're starting to do is attack muscle protein. And that's something you don't want. So you should always be looking at people that are coaching. So your audience that is coaching individuals to lose weight. If you can get the quantification of caloric intake, exercise calories, and lean body mass, you simply do that formula. So it's intake minus exercise calories divided by lean body mass in kilograms, and you get a score. And I can always send you the scores if you want to post them, or someone can look them up. Just look up low energy availability scores. And once you start dropping into that sub 40, it might be okay for short-term weight loss, but then if you start dropping too drastically, like below 30, now you're cannibalizing muscle protein, and that's the last thing you want.
Interesting. That's one of the things I'm concerned about, is when people are really cutting calories, that we start to lose metabolically active tissue. So I'm gonna speak to that in just a moment, but real quick, let me go into a little commercial, and then we'll come right back to it. All right. This episode of the NASM-CPT Podcast is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients, enjoy half off all certifications and specializations, access to free CEUs, and more. All of this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM-1. All right. So I'm going to follow up with this idea of the metabolically active tissue, and we're potentially losing some of that metabolically active tissue, right? So we don't want to lose muscle. That's bad. Starving ourselves can lead to that. Being overactive in many ways and overtraining can lead to that. This leads me to think about things where people talk about metabolism, like after I work out, then my metabolism stays elevated.
Sure.
What type of dent does that make? And do different types of workouts leave different sized dents?
So what you're referring to is what scientists call EPOC, right? EPOC is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. To the layperson, they might say it's the afterburn, like the additional calories I'm expending after a workout. So first, let's kind of frame it in the context of how big is it, right? The unfortunate reality is a lot of the original research, where a lot of claims are still being made today, right, focused on, are research studies that were done in the late 80s, early 90s, where the scientific the advancement of science, I can try that in English, the availability of scientific equipment to accurately collect that information was somewhat limited. So we got, they did kind of these studies where they would just measure for a short period of time post-exercise, and then they would extrapolate this and go, oh, your metabolism can stay elevated for 24 to 48 hours post-exercise. And those are grossly exaggerated, right? So turn around, we've come now into the 2000s, and we've had some really good research on this stuff. All right, looking at how big really is EPOC. In one particular study, they actually built chambers, and they had people exercising and then remaining in these chambers. And these chambers were specialized chambers where they could pick up all the heat that was being liberated by the body. Because remember, if you're expending more calories than you're going to liberate more heat. And in this specialized walls, these ceramic walls, was water flowing through, and the water was absorbing this heat, and they were measuring the temperature change, because that's how we measure a calorie, right? How it affects temperature of water. And, the study was, massive chambers, like over, upwards of, sort of $250,000 to build.
I was going to say, who has the pockets for this?
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right? Massive study, massive budgets and everything, right? Big grants. Yeah. Well, what we've come to realize, studies like this that have been kind of, being done consistently over the last 20 years, is that these epochs are generally not as large as we once thought.
Okay.
When you're making a claim that it could remain elevated for 24 hours, that might be an exception to the rule with an excessively large male with a lot of muscle mass who's doing a very extreme workout, right? So we look at it and say, if you want to give a generalization, like how big is the EPOC really, right? We could say a good estimation is it's probably at best somewhere between 15 to 25% of the calories you burnt in your workout. So for example, if I burnt 400 calories in my workout, you could make the estimation that my EPOC is somewhere around 75 to 100 calories. Now, we're not going to dismiss it because every calorie counts. But if you were someone who was exercising 3 times a week and you were tabulating the aggregated score of the EPOCs, it might, we say generally, leads to about 2 to 3 pounds of weight loss in a year. So you don't sell the farm on it, but every bit counts. Now, your second part of the question was, what triggers the EPOC? Well, we found predominantly intensity of exercise has one of the biggest effects. So intensity. So remember, now we have to distinguish between intensity and effort. They are not the same, right? Intensity is objectively measured. So you look at this concept of HIIT training, right? Yeah. The very definition, high intensity, right? So is it something new? No, HIIT training has been around biologically since people started competing athletically. If you wanted to get bigger and stronger faster, you had to overload the systems, right?
Right.
And if you go look at how any athlete trains that way, you'll notice, first of all, they don't care about calorie expenditure. They're more concerned with whether I have enough calories. But you also look at how they actually work. They work for a short period of time, and they take excessively long recoveries, right? Like, for example, a sprinter might sprint for 5 seconds, but then he or she might take 90 seconds to recover before they do the next sprint, which means in their total training bout, which might have been 20, 30 minutes, they might have only worked for 2-3 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But the whole idea is they're overloading their systems. They're maximizing their speed, strength, power, whatever they've got every time they do a work interval, because they're going after that goal of bigger, stronger, faster. That's where high intensity interval training kind of exists. And that's really the true basis of what HIIT training is. But the fitness industry has kind of created this, I'm going to call it an adulterated version of it, because unfortunately, it really annoys me that, we're an industry that's seeking credibility. We seek respect from the medical community, but we don't even know our science. And this idea of high intensity is getting confused with high effort or high work rate. Just because you're working harder doesn't mean you're burning more calories, right? You have to be objectively working harder. In other words, I could be able to quantify that. What is your time? What is the load you lift? How many watts are you putting on the bike? This HIIT training that the fitness industry does, it's just subjective. It's like, I'm giving you everything I got. Yeah, but you're so exhausted that you're crawling on the floor. That's not expending calories.
Gotcha.
And that we found doesn't actually trigger EPOCs. EPOCs are not triggered out of high work rates excessively or out of effort. Its intensity is primarily the number one driver of EPOCs. And number two, it's going to be duration. If you went out and trained for 3 hours, where you depleted energy reserves like glycogen and you destroy, you cannibalize some muscle, you're going to have a significant EPOC to replace all of that. So if you're saying, what are the two most effective ways to generate EPOC? One is going to be train hard, objectively, not subjectively. And number two is going to be train long. But here's the other reality. I wouldn't sell the farm on EPOC. EPOC is just a part of energy expenditure. So if you want to kill yourself just to get that little bit of EPOC, that's your prerogative, but I'm not going to recommend that for a average client because they won't come back.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And it exists. It's real. It's just there. I've read articles, especially in the past, that are like, 48 hours and hundreds and hundreds of calories. And I'm like, I don't think those are correct. So I'm glad that, again, we're busting some myths and misunderstandings.
Sure.
So here's one more I want to talk about. I wanted to make sure that I hit was aging and metabolism. So I am in my late 40s, and I have a lot of peers, even in the fitness industry, and they'll grab the belly and they'll be like, well, as you get older, the metabolism slows down. And I'm always like, is that right? Or you not work out as hard and you can afford a few more extra calories that you didn't used to be able to eat. Like what are we looking at? Is there an age where metabolism does drop? If so, how significant is it? Like, spill the beans.
Well, there's truth in everything you just said, right? It is a bit of everything. So if we look at it from a biological standpoint, right? Growth, right? So we're an adolescent and we are going through that adolescent growth spurt, right? Boys and girls going through it. And we know that the body has the potential to continue growing, especially vertically, until the growth plates close in the long bones, right? So in your femur and those type of bones. Well, that could happen as late as early 20s for a male, right? So what ends up happening is at that point, we don't need to grow this way anymore. We may grow that way, but we don't need to grow this way. So we're going to see hormones like human growth hormone levels will start to, drop drastically, right? Now, we also see other hormones that are involved in preserving muscle mass, because like you alluded to, muscle mass is metabolically active tissue. So our testosterone levels, especially in guys, a male who's in his mid-20s, when you compare it to a male who's kind of in his mid-50s, a male in his mid-50s may have half the level of testosterone, right? His levels may be dropping towards the 200, 230, sort of level, which is putting you at kind of getting you closer to what we call hypogonadism, which is low testosterone, right? A young male has numbers that could be in the 800s, 900s, right? I mean, he's just fine. So yeah, he's able to build more muscle tissue. So there is a biological event that as we age, our metabolically active hormones, the hormones that trigger these energy expending processes, are slowing down. Like a male would reach peak muscle mass late 20s, early 30s, and then it's a gradual decline, right? Metabolism rates like human growth hormone, early 20s, and then it starts to decline. So yeah, over the lifespan, we are seeing that reduction in those hormones, and that is going to manifest itself as to you're not building much tissue, so we're not expending as many calories. Okay. Then we can look at it from another standpoint. You mentioned, I don't train as hard. Yeah, we age, we might lose that competitive fervor, we don't recover as quickly, so we don't train as hard. So yeah, we're not expending as many calories in the gym or through activity, nor are we training as hard. So less calories being expended there. So that could be a contributing factor. It's also lifestyle, right? We go from being in our 20s, we're at school, we're at college, we kind of got these, we don't really have a career. We just have jobs to kind of sustain ourselves. And we've got time to squeeze in the gym because it's kind of a thing to do. And then you get older and you got family, you got responsibilities and everything. And you're like, when will I get to the gym?
Right.
I'll do it today. I just couldn't do it today because something came up with the kids and I got to do this at work. And so, there's also probably less availability. And I'm not using that as an excuse, but legitimately there might be less access based on the other responsibilities and priorities in your life to continue to train in such a way. Right. So there's lifestyle factors, right, contributing. So there's just a whole bunch. And then, you could say disposable income. I'm not eating top ramen like a starving student. I can now afford to go out and have, nice steaks and, potatoes. And so there's a little bit more of that indulgence in, some maybe less nutritious, but maybe more calorie dense foods. I think we could kind of sit here and piecemeal a million reasons for this. But there is this idea, all right, that as we age, yes. If you just go look at body composition norms, Rick, so if you were to go look at, norms from, body comp, and ACSM usually publishes this in their textbooks. Mm-hmm. You look at the percentile rankings, for men and for women, in their 20s versus their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you'll see what's considered. I'm going to use the 75th percentile as my example. The 75th percentile of body composition for a 20-year-old is much lower than the 75th percentile for body comp for a 40-year-old. All right. Because as we age, there are some changes. All right. And, we are more prone to both fat cell hyperplasia and fat cell hypertrophy.
Really?
And we kind of, more hypertrophy than hyperplasia. Hyperplasia happens in unique situations, but hypertrophy is more prevalent. But, that's why these norms change, because what is considered normal, where you said the guy can pinch his fat and go, well, it's part of the aging. Yeah, it is, because we get, more visceral fat being deposited and, subcutaneous fat maybe shifting away. And because of that visceral fat in the abdominal area, we can kind of grab and pinch, and our physique changes. We get a little bit of that belly, both men and women. And for women, it tends to be more prevalent post-menopause, right? Because of changes in their hormonal levels too.
Gotcha. Let me ask also two more things. I'm going to let you go. I got to ask about drinking and metabolism. What is the effect that alcohol has on metabolism? Does that change as you age? Because I know that there are some of the young people we're talking about. It's like, I'm drinking, it doesn't affect my metabolism. And I'll tell you what, I don't know about me, but if I have a drink, it affects everything in my life. So
yeah. Well, the biology of how alcohol is metabolized, is very complex, right? It's metabolized, and you can use some of the metabolic byproducts as energy, and then some of it is I'm not going to say toxic, but it can be diverted. It does create some toxic byproducts that the liver fortunately can remove. But if we keep it simple as this, when you're young and you go out with your friends and you drink, let's just keep it simple. You drink 3 drinks, all right? You're going to be active, and your metabolic engine is revving. That let's call it 400 to 500 calories in those 3 drinks is probably not even going to phase you, because you're going to burn those calories, without any concern, right? Now, when you're older, those same 500 calories are going to leave a little bit more of a dent, because you're not expending that many calories being active. So it's going to have a little bit of an effect on you, right? So there's one. Number 2 is we also think about, what does alcohol end up doing? Well, a lot of times it's some bad decisions. So a lot of times when people drink a little too much, they might, be less inhibited in terms of making bad nutritional choices. So, hey, let's go get, fast food. Yeah. Let's go get. So there's also that component of it too. But from a metabolic standpoint, all right, it's like everything else. When you're a young car, a brand new car, everything runs well, right? Everything's very efficient. As the car gets older, there's a little bit of, hiccups in the car. Well, our biological pathways, or our metabolic pathways that can process alcohol, don't tend to be as efficient as when we're younger. And so the effects of alcohol in the body, sure, it might put us to sleep, but then the moment the body has processed that alcohol, it's going to wake us up more. And that's something someone who's older will experience more than a younger person, because we do tend to have a lot more episodes of waking up after we fall asleep. Sometimes it's because I got to go to the bathroom. Other times it's just we don't get that, deep sleep like we do when we're younger, because when we're younger, we frankly need more of it because our body is going through a lot of repair during deep sleep. As we age, we struggle to get a little bit more of that. So if you were to drink where it put you to sleep, the moment that alcohol is processed, you're waking up, right? More likely than a younger person would. So that's just one example. Now you're waking up and you're having a tough time falling back asleep. So now you're sleep deprived. That puts stress on your body. That affects your metabolic rate. There's just a whole kind of, it's kind of it's a sort of a
Complicated.
domino effect that happens.
Yeah.
Yes, as we're older, we don't process alcohol, and we take a lot longer to recover from alcohol, the effects of alcohol, than when we're younger.
That makes a lot of sense. And then one more thing, and you've mentioned this word really 4 or 5 times already in this particular episode, which is the word cortisol. So can you just give us a little information about cortisol and how that affects us and maybe our metabolism?
Sure. Well, cortisol is what a lot of people quintessentially call the stress hormone, right? And it is true. Under states of stress, people do release cortisol. In fact, they've done studies where they say people that are very stress reactive generally release a lot of cortisol. Now, the reality with cortisol is actually it's a hormone that has many biological functions. The one that a lot of people speak to that when they actually like cortisol is they say, hey, when you've got cortisol in circulation, cortisol actually is going to try and facilitate increased utilization of fat. We call it lipolysis, right? So a few years ago, a popular trend was fasted cardio. If you remember the phase of fasted cardio. And the idea was, when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol levels are generally higher. And I'll explain that in a second as to why they might be higher. And that's the best time to do cardio. We don't want you to do intense exercise because intense exercise burns carbs. We want you to do a moderate bout of exercise because you've got cortisol. That's going to facilitate more fat burning. Were they lying? No, it's the absolute truth. But the reality is the amount of the difference between someone who's exercising after eating and someone who's exercising in a fasted state, the difference in fat calories was minimal, right? Especially when you weigh the downside. So why does cortisol shift us towards burning more fat? And that's where cortisol, I believe, is very noble, right? Cortisol is absolutely critical to preserving blood sugar, right? And that's why it does that. When your blood sugar levels are getting low, your cortisol levels will naturally go up in an attempt to try and spare the blood sugar levels you have. So let me unpack that one just a little bit further. Why do I need to maintain blood sugar? Well, because first of all, there's various organs that prefer glucose as a fuel, such as the brain and the central nervous system, but they can feed off of ketones. But one in particular, your red blood cells, can only feed off of glucose.
Ooh.
They don't have mitochondria. So if you don't have blood sugar, you don't have fuel for your red blood cells, which means you don't carry oxygen to your brain. So this is where cortisol becomes very noble, because the question is, how do we keep glucose in circulation? Because you don't have much in the bloodstream at any point of time, all right? It's a very small amount. So you have this organ called the liver, and the liver is the only organ that can release glucose directly into the blood. The muscles can't. So when you eat carbs, and let's say we go to dinner, Rick, and we have some pasta and some bread, carb sources, and now we're packing those carbs into our cells, predominantly the muscle and then the liver, right? Now, we ate dinner, and now you're going to do what? We're not going to go to bed immediately, so we'll stay up for a few more hours, and then you're going to go to this overnight sleep. So it might be 10, 12 hours, right? So when you went to bed, if we were to peek into your muscle cells and your liver cells, they're pretty much nicely topped off because we had a nice carb dinner, right? But overnight, what's going to happen is your organs are still working. So that liver tank, which is small to start with, right? Might only have 100 grams, give or take, depending on the size of the body. That liver tank is going to drain itself, right? Because 100 grams is only 400 calories. It's not that much.
Yeah.
Now, in the morning, when that tank is getting, I'm not going to say dangerously low, but when it's getting low, there's concerns. We need to preserve blood glucose, right? So the liver, being the only organ that can do that, says, listen, my tank's getting empty. So what I'm going to do is activate the production of cortisol, and cortisol is going to try and shift the body's metabolism to favor a little bit more fats in order to spare that limited remaining store of carbs. That's the role. Your muscles have nothing to do with this. When you go do fasted cardio, and I'm not worried about your muscles because you packed carbs into your muscle cells last night and they're stuck in there. They can't be released.
Fascinating. Their
fate is you store me till you use me. It's the liver that is constantly being fluctuating through the day, right? So anytime your liver tank gets empty, you're naturally going to see an elevation of cortisol. Now, cortisol, we like it because it says, hey, let's shift to burning more fats. So that gives me a check mark in the plus column. What I also love about cortisol is saying, hey, I'm trying to keep you alive by sparing your blood glucose. Hey, another check mark in the plus column. But then that comes at an expense. What could cortisol do? It can say, well, here's what else I can do. If we don't eat and this tank is getting low, I also have another option. I can make glucose. Well, we have this massive reservoir of protein in our body that we call muscle tissue. represents about 99% of our usable protein, and we can attack some of that. We have certain amino acids that we call glucogenic, which means they can be broken down and converted to glucose. Well, that's also influenced by cortisol. And that's what we don't like. That's that whole idea when people are getting skinny fat, losing weight. This is the role of cortisol. So that's what we don't like about cortisol. And then if you think about how I started our conversation this morning is, cortisol can also regulate your metabolism. So one other way that I can help preserve blood sugar is to say, let's slow down your metabolism. And cortisol can suppress the production of, the hormones out of the thyroid gland. And that can slow down your overall resting metabolic rate. So you kind of see there's just some. Cortisol has many other roles in the body, but there's just some. Cortisol is involved in inflammation, the immune response. Think of prednisone, cortisone injections. Those are synthetic relatives of the hormone cortisol because cortisol has an abundance of roles, but those are just some of the metabolic roles I've just shared with you.
Unbelievable. This is so wonderfully impressive. I could continue to do this for a long time, but I'm going to respect your time and our listeners' time and just express my gratitude. So Fabio, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us. If you could let people know if they want to know more about you, or they want to find these pamphlet books that you have, what are ways?
Pamphlets, ouch.
These very scholarly pamphlets.
So actually the first two, if you go to Amazon, they'll be there. The first two are supposed to start getting released in the next week. So great. That's the first two, which will be Principles of Nutritional Science and then Nutritional Coaching, which covers behavior, communication, nutritional strategies and everything. And then in there it shows the list of the upcoming ones, which is sports nutrition, exercise phys, kinesiology, corrective exercise, and training the older client. Those will be over the next 3 years. But yeah, Amazon will be the place to go get it. And then, of course, I occasionally post things on Facebook. I'm not very big on social media anymore. I just don't have the time to manage it. But you can find articles that posted and have had them, right? And the idea is let's just share knowledge and let's all get better together.
I love it. Thank you so much, Fabio. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're here, thank you so much for joining us. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family, and leave a review. That helps us get the word out. People can find us better. So if you could do that, we'd appreciate it. If you want to reach out to me, hit me up. You can do so on Instagram at dr.rickrichey or email me, rick.richey@nasm.org. Thanks for listening. Keep inspiring people to fitness. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.